It's time to talk about middle grade and young adult lit, because talking about our work is how we improve it. If you're looking for more, then head over to abms.blog for more interviews, analyses, and exercises. I'm joined today by Carly Heath, debut author of The Reckless Kind. I'm Jessica Tuckerman, and this is All by My Shelf. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Jessica. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yay! Just to get us started, can you give us a quick pitch for The Reckless Kind?
Yes, The Reckless Kind takes place in 1904, and it's about three misfit teens in a rural Scandinavian village who defy the expectations of their society in every possible way. They leave their homes, they go off to live on their own in a little mountain cabin above town, and in order to maintain their way of life, they need to defeat the town patriarch in the region's annual winter horse race. So it's a found family story. It's a story of, proclaiming your identity, defying authority, and standing up for the life that you believe is right, even when all these forces are against you.
That's great. My first question actually comes from one of my listeners, from Rudy K. And Rudy asks, "I'm sure you get this all the time, but why did you set The Reckless Kind in Norway, 1904?"
Great question, Rudy. Yeah, I really love Norway. I've always been really fascinated by Norway. I mean, ever since I was like in middle school, I was obsessed with Norwegian fjord ponies, and I wanted to do something with Norwegian fjord ponies. um, so hence the horse race. But I really kind of started living in the world of Norway and getting like the characters existing in my brain after I read Kristen Lavransdatter, which is uh, the book by Sigrid Undset that was written in the 1920s, and it's set in medieval Norway, and it's very vivid, and the setting and the characters are very vivid and fully realized. But the message of the book is not one that I'm a big fan of. The message is basically, if you defy your parents, you'll suffer. And so I love everything about that setting. And so kind of after reading that book, I just started getting all of these scenes in my head for the book that would become The Reckless Kind. I started thinking of these characters started living and talking and going through their life, and I kind of became obsessed with Erland and Gunnar and Asta and this world that they lived in that's a rural village. I love I'm also a big fan of the turn of the century, early 1900s setting, because it's it's a time that's pre World War One. There's it's a very, this, especially in like a rural setting, this feeling of like optimism
Hmm.
was very prevalent at the time. It was called the Golden Age, but the uh, there was just the inklings of technology coming in, where people had, motor cars as not necessarily as transportation vehicles, but mostly as like recreational vehicles. And people, never really thought that they would get rid of horses completely. So I liked also the idea of the tension between horse, like Fred, who is like the horse brother, who's like into his livelihood is all horses, and
Hmm.
then Gunnar, who is like the motor car brother, and so I like that tension. I also had, when I was in college, I did a costume design project for Much Ado About Nothing, and I set it in the early 1900s. And so I was already really familiar with the costuming and kind of the culture of that era, and I was kind of already in my brain, kind of living a little bit in the era. So it all, sometimes just your random interests just sort of converge together as you create something.
That is so true about,
Yeah.
or like everything in your past just kind of like comes together and melds into whatever you're writing. It's It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
It's like, the book I'm currently writing, it's like Scandinavia, it's also astrology, it's also like witchcraft, and it's also like animals. So, like, whenever you write something, like all of the things that you randomly find really interesting all just manage to kind of come together, and it can't help but be loud in your writing.
That's great. My next question is, as you said in your pitch, The Reckless Kind features a story about found family, and I think that found family is probably one of the healthiest tales that we can tell in children's lit, like all the way up to young adult, because there are so many stories, like you had mentioned in your pitch, that there's just like the message is if you disobey your parents, bad things will come, and it's like parents aren't always like the best people.
Yes,
And
yeah, just literally, just because someone made children does not mean they know anything at all about how to be a
yes,
successful human. Like,
yes,
anyone can have a child. It does not take any sort of degree or talent or training or background in like human development. So I really think it's so important. I mean, I can't. I think I'm working on giving a talk about this, but I think it's so important to challenge teens to speak up for their needs,
hmm
and also identify adults who are, even if that adult is your parent or your teacher or even your boss, if they aren't doing what's in your best interest, you need to stand up to them or leave them.
yeah.
Find another way to exist and get support, because you cannot rely on adults. I'm an adult, I can speak for us. We do not know what we're talking about,
We
like,
don't.
pretty.
Not even a little
Most of
bit. We
them.
don't.
Yeah. Do not trust us, teenagers. Trust yourself. That's the most important thing.
Yes, and I think that's such a beautiful message. Like, I remember when I was doing my MFA, I had written a piece where a girl she runs away from her family, and somebody in my class who's already published was like, the publishing world is going to want her to make amends with her family. And I'm like, her family was abusive. I don't want her to make amends with her family. Like,
Oh yeah.
the only amends that I think that she should make is I forgive you and I'm never speaking to you again, just so that they don't have like space in her head. That's the only way that I see any sort of amends happening. And it sparked this really big debate about like, you write for kids. Should you be telling kids to run away from home? I'm like,
Yes,
no,
absolutely. Yes.
no, we should not. But we should definitely be telling them, like, stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
You
I
know, like, as,
sometimes run away from home. Like,
yeah, sometimes,
sometimes, if you have a good, like, support center or homeless shelter, or if you can get help from a friend, yeah, sometimes running away from home is the best option. I mean,
yeah,
I think as kids, I think Gen Z is really opening up to this idea of, if people are toxic, like cut them out.
yeah,
Even if you're related to them. If someone is not doing good by you, and is not doing things that are in your best interest, and they're harmful, and they make you feel bad, cut them off. And I think that's a
yeah.
really, really healthy mindset, as opposed to the boomer mindset, which was really like, family is everything. Even if they
Yeah.
are abusive, you must stay with them, and hang out every Thanksgiving with them.
Yup.
Oh no.
That is definitely a very hard lesson to unlearn because,
Yeah.
like, when I grew up, you know, like, I'm the child of a boomer, so the boomers values are instilled within me that family is everything. And it doesn't matter what family does because it's family. And like I got some family members that like I'm glad I don't talk to anymore.
Yeah.
And aside from that, you know, toxic and often abusive relationship, it's like Christmas is a lot easier without talking to these people.
Yeah.
And not just, you know, sitting down in the house, but like I don't have to go shopping for these people,
Yes.
which is always it was always so obnoxious and triggering because it's like I hate you, but I have to get you something because you're family.
Yeah.
And you just sit there and then you're just like grumpy the whole holiday. It's you
Yeah.
shouldn't have to put up with people like that. And I
Exactly.
in the piece that I'm currently querying, one of the messages is like, if you don't feel safe somewhere, get up and leave. And,
That's such a
you
good
know,
message.
and it's so hard to do. Like, I'm preaching this message and it's hard for me to do it.
Mhm.
But like, if you're not comfortable, you shouldn't stay there. There's this idea that we have to kind of like take a deep breath and just take whatever's coming to us is so awful.
It's
And
toxic and it's a bad cycle for future relationships too.
yes, yeah. Oh, that
Yeah.
was a tangent from all what I wanted to ask.
Oh no, it's good. I mean, it just makes me think of so many things. Like, when if you're programmed from an early age to tolerate abuse and mistreatment, and even just not outward abuse, but just microaggressions. And
Yep,
if you're programmed to tolerate that, then you're going to get into relationships with people in your future adult life who give you microaggressions and toxic treatment and who make you feel bad, and you don't set up the boundary of, actually, no, that treatment of me is not appropriate. And
yep,
then, the cycle continues. Then if you are the type of person who does have children, then you're going to instill that in their children. And then the cycle of abuse and mistreatment and toxic behavior is just going to continue for generation after generation. So
yep.
getting to that space where you can be like, telling the younger generation, if someone makes you feel bad, and maybe they aren't like calling you names, maybe they aren't hitting you, but
Yeah,
there's something about their energy that makes you feel bad and you don't want to be around them, even if you're related to them, even if they're a teacher, even if they're your boss. If you get that vibe, cut them off. It's okay. And the cool thing is, when you cut someone off, they learn. Or if they're a narcissist, they don't learn, and
yeah.
who cares about them anyway. But if they're somewhat less than a narcissist, they'll be like, people keep leaving my life. I wonder if it's because I'm an asshole. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
And
maybe
some
they might
people need to
change
hear
their
that.
behavior because you cut them off.
Yeah, and some people need to hear that. And it's like it's not your job to sit there and like make put yourself in harm's way just so that this person doesn't feel bad. Like, you shouldn't feel bad about having to hang out with people. Hanging out with people is supposed to make you feel good. Like,
Mhm.
being
And
social is supposed to make you feel good.
and then connecting with the people who do make you feel good, and making a point of devoting your life and your time to people who make you feel good. That's awesome. So the more you cut the bad people off, the more you open up your time and your energy to people who can be really awesome.
Exactly. So my question,
Oh yeah, we went
uh,
on a tangent. Woohoo,
yeah,
tangent time.
we just went off. It's fine. It's fine. My question, which actually builds off of this, is what was it like to write a female character demanding her own agency in historical fiction?
Yeah, she does take some time to get there, and a big part of her journey is unpacking a lot of the programming that had been instilled in her. Something that she struggles with in the early chapters is, I should feel grateful for uh, this guy who wants to marry me. And he says, aren't you glad I overlook your imperfections?
Ooh.
And she feels a certain way about that, but doesn't know how to articulate and acknowledge that whatever it is about him just does not make her feel good.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, it really does take the whole journey. She then goes to identifying the types of things that she does want, but knowing wondering if they really exist, knowing that she's gravitating towards Gunnar and Erlin, but not sure if she has a right to have a life with them.
Mhm.
uh, and so it's fun to kind of discover and find all of these little pieces of programming that even women today are subjected to, uh,
Mhm.
whether you're deserving of something or not, or if you should demand that someone treat you the right way. uh, and so yeah, it was a fun process of discovery, and it makes me really want to write a sequel, get the opportunity to write a sequel, where then we are with Asta, where she's come into her own and is able to self-advocate.
That's great. I do want to say I've absolutely dated somebody like that. It's been like, "Aren't you glad that I don't care that you're fat?"
Oh
And
my God.
yeah, I have to put this out there as a, PSA, just dump them. Get them out
Immediate.
of your life.
Yeah.
Do not be like Jessica, do not sit around for another 2 years. Just get them out because they don't get better. They just have
Yeah.
more shit to say. So just get them out of your life.
Yeah, there's a lot of cis guys in our current out there in the world who really do think that women should be grateful to them.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
Yes.
Hopefully, hopefully everyone will just stay away from those types. But there's so many of them.
There's
It's hard.
so many. There's so many, and they range, like they go from like, "Aren't you glad I don't care that you're blonde?" Because like you can fix if you're blonde, you can change your hair color. And then there's people that are like, "Aren't you glad I don't care that you have a big nose?" And I'm like, we're getting a little more personal now.
Yeah.
Like we seem to
Wow.
be escalating into things. And I remember when I broke up with that guy, I'm like, "You don't seem to like anything about me. Why are we still together?" And he's like, "No, no, you should be grateful." I'm like, I'm not. So goodbye.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, like, whew, those people are awful.
Awful.
Ugh.
Oh, I'm sorry you went through that. That just, yeah,
Yeah, don't be sorry.
sucks.
It is not your fault. It is his fault, and it took me a very long time to like get there. That like, not all the problems are my problems, but
Yep.
yeah, that's another hard lesson to learn. That like, because if you're coming from that kind of relationship,
Mhm.
that gets ingrained in you too. That you should be grateful that somebody is paying you the time of day, and like it's so hard to unlearn all of these
Mhm.
things.
It
Uh,
is. It is. Yeah. Living in the patriarchy sucks. Hopefully
yeah.
we'll dismantle it.
Ugh. Ugh. I'm so angry. My next question is, what advice do you have for other historical fiction writers who are looking to tell a more diverse story?
Oh gosh, there's so much research available on Google Books. Like, if you're thinking that you have to go to some big city library to find all the documents and the research, and you have to buy expensive research books, you actually don't. There is a wealth of information on Google Books, and you can find all sorts of historical facts and details by looking up like period appropriate search terms related to queerness and disability and gender. And especially if you're interested in like queer, like, 1800s, early 1900s, that sort of era. Check out Edward Carpenter. He has all these pamphlets that are very like pro queer, and it was all written in like the 1890s. So it's got the language and the it gives you a sense of like the culture of that time, and since he's very pro, he's like an early gay rights activist.
Hmm.
So since he's pro all that, um, and he's also a socialist, and so he's got like that political agenda too. It's really great to dive into his pamphlets and get that perspective, because it wasn't all like terrible oppression. Oh, if you're queer, you're suffering and
Hmm.
all of that. It I mean, there was persecution, and there was that the Christian domination of ideology happening at that time, in Europe at least.
Hmm.
But there are voices out there of happy queer and happy, uh, diverse stories. And so, seek those out, find those perspectives. And also, read a lot of historical fiction that's being written right now, because there's more and more authors who are now writing happy, diverse historical fiction stories where it isn't all suffering and persecution and all of that. So check out all those authors who are writing right now. And yeah, I would just say I think my main takeaway is I mean, I don't want to say like only write happy stories, but just be aware that there is a positive perspective out there, and kind of seek out those positive, encouraging voices, because to color your world. Because I think also the dominant culture wants us to believe that back in the day it was all oppression,
Hmm.
and in many ways, uh, a lot of oppression is happening right now, and
Yeah.
like there were periods in history where people were a little bit more chill about things, and so it's kind of cyclical. And I think the dominant culture sometimes wants you to believe in that past oppression, so you can say, see how far we've come. Whereas if you look at certain time periods and certain communities that were happening in historical times, you'll find that actually there were periods where things were really tolerant and things were very open, and there was a lot of progress being made. But then that progress got clamped down on by a certain agenda. And so I think it's important to understand those cycles.
Yeah, especially if you're writing historical fiction and really just like as a person, it's important to
Yeah.
understand those cycles. Because I remember, like, it's definitely another thing to unlearn. I was talking, oh, I don't remember who I was talking to the other day, but we were talking about the civil rights movement and teaching critical race theory, and how, of course, you would teach critical race theory alongside the civil rights movement. Like, that just seems,
Yeah.
like common sense. Uh, and then we got to talking about how it's taught, and how it's always taught as a matter of history. Like, these problems are no longer problems because they
Hmm.
only happened in the 60s with the civil rights movement. And I'm like, but it's relevant now, like,
Yeah.
and it's continued to be relevant. It really didn't go anywhere. We just like made a few laws that nobody listens to, like,
Yeah.
and that's important to understand, and to so that you can look at your world with a more critical eye, as opposed to like, yeah, okay, well, this is just a fluke. Like, no,
Hmm.
it really isn't. At
Yeah,
all.
exactly. Like we're still dealing with white settlers, and genocide against indigenous populations.
Hmm.
uh, the reason that there's so much like economic disparity between white people and everyone else is because historically white people have had access to education and wealthy neighborhoods that they could live in, where
Hmm.
they get better education because our education system is funded by taxpayers in their community, and so by property taxes, I should say, in the community. So wealthy communities get access uh, to
Better
higher
schools.
quality
Yep.
education. And I mean, there's just so many things that are at work here, and then systematic things and systemic things, that's what I meant to say, that are at work here, that are leading to increasing economic disparities. Yeah, it needs to be talked about. And I just remember when I was younger and Obama was president, I remember how ignorant I was to think, oh, cool, racism's over now, because
Yep.
Obama got elected president. And I lived in this, like, oh, like this, like almost fairy tale world. I'm like, oh, wow, everything's getting better. And now that I'm older and I look back on that, I'm like, wow, actually, everything has gotten worse because now the racists and the homophobes are loud and
Hmm.
they have no shame. I think that was like an old like a graffiti thing I saw during the Trump era. Someone wrote, make racists ashamed again, or something like that. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, like as a white person, I was so ignorant to so many things, and I kind of worked on educating myself more and more, as I think all white people should do.
Hmm.
But now, not only are they trying to like cut off education, but they're trying to like wash everything over and make it seem like this stuff doesn't exist. It's awful. So we're definitely going backwards.
Yes.
Uh,
I have
it's
definitely noticed that where
yeah.
I I was on a trip with some friends recently, and on our way home, two of us had stopped to get some food, and the table next to us was just like, I'm not going to repeat what they said because it was so unfathomably racist to me that, and like those kind of comments used to be whispered, you know, and
Yeah,
like
I
they
was
were,
wondering, maybe it was because I grew up in California in the Bay Area that like I was never aware of like
yeah,
racism, like like overt racism or something. But then, and maybe it's because then I moved elsewhere and I got access to more diverse types of white people. But then, or maybe it's because of Trump, and Trump like emboldened the racists to just say things.
yeah,
But yeah, I definitely notice we're not in a situation where we're getting better and more progressive. We're in a situation where we're getting closer to like Germany in the 1930s. Like that's basically what it
yeah.
feels like right now.
That is definitely what it feels like, where like these ideas are just they're so emboldened, and it doesn't matter how many times you go like that's not okay. People are like, whatever, I'm entitled to an opinion, and if I hear that one more time, I'm going to sock somebody in the face. But like
Mhm.
I'm like, yes, you're entitled to opinion, just not that opinion because it's incredibly racist. Like, why aren't you ashamed of that? Why aren't you deeply ashamed of that? Where did that shame go?
Mhm.
And I wonder about that because I also edit on the side, and I've gotten some pieces that I've just like I've refunded people's money
Oh
because
geez.
I don't want to edit that. I don't want to
Yeah.
be a part of that. I just like I some of them are light. I had one that was written by a white woman that was all about a little Japanese girl who was good at math and solved all of her problems with bento boxes. I'm like,
Oh
okay.
no. Oh no.
I'm like, while they aren't like, negative stereotypes, they're still stereotypes, and we have to have a talk now. And she was open to it. She's like, oh, okay, I see. Like, it's not my story to tell. I'm like, right. So then she rewrote it like 4 times or so. But I've also had some that are just like, I don't know who told them that it would be okay to write a story like that.
No.
Yeah, and I'm like, you know what? Here you go. I need money, but not that bad. That'll just weigh on my conscience. Here you go. Like, mm-mm. Uh,
Yeah. So I mean, the lesson to white people writing is definitely um, one, think about whose story you have the right to tell.
hmm
White people have you could tell great stories about how you can use your white privilege um, and serve uh, others and serve improving the world, but not in a white savior narrative,
Nope.
not in a oh wow, I have now been taught and educated by someone. No, or and the point of view of someone who doesn't have as much privilege as you do. Really think about think about the stories that you tell and who should be telling certain stories, and definitely higher sensitivity readers. I
Yes.
am a big fan of sensitivity readers. For my book, The Reckless Kind, and for my book that I'm writing now, I constantly seek out the help of sensitivity readers, and they make my work so much better because they point things out that I had not realized or noticed before. And then they also contribute to me adding more nuance to the story as well, and the characters, and help the characters really feel more realistic. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really, really helpful. And, you know, if this, I've heard some people say sensitivity readers. Okay, well, think of it as authenticity readers. If
Yep.
you are writing about ancient Greece, you might want to have like an ancient Greek historian like read over your stuff to get some authentic, get an eye of an expert. All
Yes.
right. So if you are writing a character who has a marginalization that's different from yours, having an authenticity reader uh, look that over and see if there are any stereotypes that are coming up or any problematic representation. And you then get the opportunity to write with a little bit more nuance.
Mm-hmm. And it's great too because they point out like their whole job is to point out things that you didn't know. It's not
Mhm.
like you're giving it to someone who is then going to yell at you. They're going in there with the knowledge that you don't necessarily know what you're talking about, and they're helping to make sure that you seem like you know what you're talking about, or that you
Definitely.
have done any research whatsoever to know what you're talking about. And that's not a bad thing. Like, researching and not knowing something is not a bad thing. Education is good. Like,
Yeah.
learning is good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no one writes a good first draft.
No.
So, getting feedback from multiple people to tell you either this makes no sense, or I'm
Yeah.
confused, or I do not know as a reader what I should be feeling here, to getting feedback from someone who is giving you perspectives from that community that you are representing or and writing. You want to get as many different perspectives on your work as better, because then you can't help uh, but make it better.
Yeah. And with that, although this will be a very difficult segue, it is time for the first game.
Oh, fun.
Yay!